I'd like to introduce you to Vanessa Sullivan, but I can't. I can't introduce you to Vanessa because on September 25th, 2010, Vanessa was killed by the defendant. The defendant was a designated driver. The defendant was a designated driver who drove drunk. Because the defendant drove drunk, Vanessa Sullivan is dead. On September 24th, 2010, Vanessa turned 21 years old. She had a family who loved her dearly, friends who looked up to her, plans for her future. But on that night, all of those things were taken from her when the defendant made the decision to get behind the wheel after she was too drunk to drive. And we believe the evidence will show that on September 24th, 2010, the defendant was reckless. She drank excessively, knowing that she would later be expected to drive. Now you will hear from Taylor Hobson, Vanessa's best friend, who was with the defendant and Vanessa the night Vanessa was killed. She will tell you about how the defendant had drink after drink after drink after drink. And then she insisted that she was okay to drive. And then she got behind the wheel. And after she got behind the wheel, she blatantly disregarded the speed limit and attempted to make a 20-minute trip in half the time. She ignored the pleading of her passengers. Slow down. And ultimately, she crashed into a tree and killed Vanessa Sullivan. To put it simply, she just didn't care. She didn't care that the weather was bad that night. She didn't care about the safety of Vanessa and Taylor when she was drinking. And it was this apathy, this indifference to human life that allowed her to act with such extreme recklessness. Now you will also hear from an eyewitness who saw the crash as it happened. He will tell you about the heavy rain that night. He will tell you about how he saw the defendant going too fast on the curb on Canyon Road. And how he saw the defendant crash into a tree, killing Vanessa Sullivan. Now, today the state has the burden to prove to you, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defendant murdered Vanessa Sullivan while driving under the influence of alcohol. And we believe the evidence will show that that is exactly what happened. Now, you will hear from a forensic scientist who gave a breathalyzer test to the defendant after the accident. He will tell you just what the defendant's alcohol content was after the crash. Now, we believe the evidence will also show that a second forensic scientist concluded it is inarguable that the defendant was too drunk to drive that night. Folks, after you hear the evidence today, I believe that there will be only one choice to make. The defendant was a designated driver. The defendant was a designated driver who drove drunk. Because the defendant drove drunk, Vanessa Sullivan is dead. Because Vanessa Sullivan is dead, we know that you will find the defendant guilty of murder and driving under the influence of alcohol.
Is there an opening for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
One moment. Whenever you're ready, Counselor.
May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of the jury. To date,